So what about real estate prices in Batumi in 2025? Let's break this question down in detail. We'll talk about the prices themselves, growth trends, and other important points that matter to you. Let's get started. Prices by segment are roughly in the following range. If we're talking about the economy class, it's about $1,000 to $1,300 per square meter. If we're talking about the comfort class, that's somewhere from $1,300 to $2,000 per square meter. It depends on the location of the specific residential complex and so on. If we're talking about business class, which is higher end housing, and there are actually only a couple of such complexes in Batumi, the range is roughly $2,500 to $3,500 per square meter. And if we're talking about the premium class, well, there are no completed complexes yet, only ones under construction. And prices approximately start, if we're talking about those under construction, from $2,500 per square meter. If we're talking about a building that's already nearing completion, that's somewhere from $6,000 per square meter. So that's the current price range we have today across different segments. If we look at rentals, then for rentals in the economy class, let's take a studio as an example. By the way, the prices I mentioned earlier for ready-to-move in housing were prices with finishing included. For rentals, if we're talking about economy class, it's roughly in the range of $200 to $300 for a studio. The same studio in the comfort class will cost around $300 to $400 on average. If we're talking about a one-bedroom apartment, that's about $400 to $500 in the comfort class. And for business class, it's roughly from $600 to $900. These are the main price ranges you can find here. Again, of course, everything depends on the location. You shouldn't assume, for example, that the Old Town location is more expensive. There are also many economy and comfort class buildings there, and their prices are roughly comparable to the range I just mentioned. Many people who saw the prices in 2020 and 2021 feel a bit nostalgic for those prices because they were about 30% lower, sometimes 20, sometimes 30. And naturally, people want to go back to those prices. But I always ask, well, would you want to get the same quality of projects that were being built back then? They were significantly worse because, first of all, there was a lot of economy class construction, and there weren't that many ready comfort class projects, at least not as many as there are now. And naturally, you got a lower price, but you also got much lower quality housing. That matters too. So what will happen with prices? Will they keep rising? All these questions are very concerning. And in general, I understand that forecasts for the future are extremely important for many people. You often hear the phrase that no one knows what will happen with prices in a year, 2 years, and so on. I believe that such phrases are most often said by people who have a very poor understanding of how buyers behave in the market, how prices rise, how they fall, and so on. If you understand this mechanism, then to a fairly good and certain extent, you can predict prices. We'll talk about this today as well. Everything related to price increases or decreases can be explained very easily. There is one clear criterion: supply and demand. This works not only in real estate, but in any other field it works exactly the same way. If demand is higher than supply, then prices rise accordingly. If demand is lower than supply, then prices will inevitably adjust one way or another. Why does it work this way? Because a buyer who comes to the market and wants to purchase some kind of real estate always looks at the options available to them. And in the case where we're talking about overseas real estate, the buyer doesn't just compare options here. More often, they also compare options across different countries. That is, they look at what they can buy in Russia, what they can buy in Europe, what they can buy in other countries, and compare all of this in their mind. Why? Because a person who is interested in overseas real estate is, for the most part, rarely limited. Of course, it happens, but it's less common. If we take, for example, the pricing mechanics of 2022, they are also absolutely clear and understandable. There was a certain supply on the market which was balanced by a certain demand that existed at that time. A very large number of people arrived all at once. Naturally, demand sharply exceeded supply. In other words, people bought up most of the apartments and prices started to rise. That is, those who were selling understood that buyers had little choice, so they could raise the price. Prices were rising. This was a so-called black swan event, yes, according to Nassim Taleb's book, an event that first of all happens rarely, and secondly is quite difficult to predict. But it happened. What's the problem? Most people are now counting on the same scenario, and then many realtors, when selling apartments, fueled this whole story saying, but buy now, prices are going to rise. People believed them, of course, and bought. Why? Well, because naturally everyone always wants to make more money. People always hope for the best, that prices will keep rising, but they never rise forever. Moreover, as I've already told you, it's very easy to understand the limits to which prices will rise. It's enough to simply compare real estate prices across certain segments. Well, for example, let's take a look. A buyer comes in and wants to purchase a comfort class project. What's going through their mind? First, they compare. Okay, what can I buy in my home country, for example, for $2,000 per square meter? That's 200,000 rubles per square meter. In St. Petersburg, you can basically buy a comfort class property for that amount. In Moscow, maybe a bit farther out, but you can also buy a comfort class property for that price. And then the buyer starts comparing in their mind, what am I getting? So what kind of comfort class property do I get in St. Petersburg? What kind of comfort class property do I get here? And all those who say that tomorrow real estate prices might go up, might rise by $500, by $300. First of all, the first question is, in which segment? The second question, why would that happen? That's it. When you answer the question of why, you can always understand that there's no real reason. Yes. So if there is a so-called comfort class property that costs $2,000, I'm just giving an example now, $2,000 per square meter with finishing, that's about 200,000 rubles. It won't cost 2,500 tomorrow because a buyer from Russia will come, take a look and ask, why should I pay 2,500? Why should I pay 300,000 per square meter? Yes, that's obvious. And a person understands that, for example, this class of housing isn't worth it, so they won't buy it. They might rent it instead, maybe solve their issues in some other way, go and buy in another country and so on. So real estate prices are also determined by how valuable it is to the buyer. And those who tell you that tomorrow, the day after, or in a year, this real estate will double or triple in price, don't believe them. That's an absolute lie. So under what conditions could this real estate double or triple in price when in theory it shouldn't? For example, its fair market price compared to other countries is 200,000 per square meter. Under what conditions could it start costing 300,000 per square meter tomorrow? There is only one condition, the same kind of abnormal influx, anomalous arrival of buyers to the market as happened in 2022. The only question is, will it happen? And the next question that arises is, if this anomaly happens again, how long will it last? Because again, an anomaly is a sharp price jump on which some people can make money and some might manage to sell at a higher price for a short time. But you should always remember that this situation is short-lived. And most people confusing the fact that this is a temporary situation, they have an inner desire for it to last forever, but it will not last forever. Because it's clear that someone will buy at an overvalued price, having come and given in to temptation. Most people, however, will wait and buy at a reasonable, normal price, because firstly, people remember prices, secondly, they can compare. And thirdly, right now on the market, we are seeing exactly what I am telling you about. That is, the number of people who came in and overpaid for apartments are, of course, now selling them at a loss. Secondly, the majority of people still want to buy at prices that make sense to them. I mean, both the price and the value of the product. As for the average prices on the market, it's important to understand that many analytical reports use an average snapshot. That is, they lump together the prices of economy projects, comfort class projects, business and premium. They mix it all together and present you with some kind of average chart. This is always very misleading. Why? Because first of all, this price is inaccurate. Yes, this is just an average per square meter. Secondly, it doesn't give you objective information. So, in fact, you don't really understand how much each segment costs. You can't make a decision about where and how to enter the market, at what price and so on. For example, right now in Batumi, we have a certain imbalance, right? Developers are building quite a lot of economy and comfort class projects, and as a result, demand in this segment can't keep up with supply. In other words, supply is greater than demand. There are difficulties both with selling and with buying, and there are some nuances involved. For example, today, most of the projects under construction that you can find here are already priced at the same level as resale properties. So, essentially, there's no real point in investing in new builds because the price of resale properties is either the same or very close. These factors also absolutely need to be taken into account. How does geopolitics affect the market in general? Undoubtedly, politics does have an impact on the market. But for investments, if you want to earn and grow your capital, it's better to focus on other factors. It's better to look at those projects that, regardless of politics, will provide steady growth and offer you the price and value range where you can earn well. In my Telegram channel, I have analyzed this issue in detail using projects and examples with numbers. You can see how it works, which projects are better to invest in, which ones are better to avoid, and so on. Today, there are many positive factors. Well, for example, what are they? Year after year, the tourist flow to Georgia is increasing. You can look at the charts of arriving people every year. There are more and more of them. The exception was the pandemic. By the way, that's exactly the kind of anomaly when prices could actually drop quite significantly. But again, that was a short period. If you plan your strategies correctly, you can easily get through those periods. In other words, you'll have enough margin of safety, profitability, and all the necessary factors. The main thing is to ensure you have good profit margins built in. Unfortunately, many people enter with a very small margin, like just $100 to $300 per square meter. Naturally, any fluctuations in market prices eat up their profitability, and then they are forced to sell their property at a loss. So the truth is that this is a more important key factor than what people are usually used to paying attention to. It's important to enter projects that have a very high margin. That is, you should at least have a buffer of $1,000 or $1,500 extra, right? This comes from the construction of the property, from the increase in its value. And then even if there are some fluctuations, yes, your profit will be lower, but you won't end up in the red, you won't lose money, and you'll avoid many other issues as well. As for 2025, of course, there are different factors at play here as well. First of all, recently visa-free travel was granted to the Chinese, meaning that Chinese tourists should start coming here soon, I think in even greater numbers. The second, of course, is a negative factor, the catastrophe in the Black Sea. Most of the Russian coastline is polluted, and there is a likelihood that in the 2025 season the number of tourists here will increase significantly, including those from Russia. At the same time, tourists from Arab countries also come here and play in the casinos. Indians come as well. And in general, people from various European countries often come here to undergo treatment at the health resorts. The sanatorium theme is very popular here. There are many thermal springs coming up from underground. The sanatoriums are great, high quality, and many people specifically enjoy coming here for treatment, plus it's inexpensive. So it's both high quality and affordable. That's also an important factor. What are the advantages in Georgia in terms of saving money here and so on? The main advantage, of course, is the ease of depositing and withdrawing funds. Here, no one will ask you for any certificates. There's no bureaucracy. You can easily keep your money here and just as easily withdraw it, right? And a lot of people like that. That's why the number of people who decide to keep their money here, whether in banks or in real estate, is growing every year. This is also without a doubt a positive factor. Of course, there are also negative factors. A lot of people come here without really understanding how market mechanisms work when it comes to buying real estate, what to buy, what should increase in value, and what shouldn't. That's why, by the way, this isn't just the case here. It's the same in Dubai and many other countries. People invest their money in projects that are either at their price peak or shouldn't be expected to grow at all, not in any foreseeable future. But again, lacking understanding, they listen to all sorts of so-called experts, put their money there, and then can't even get back the amounts they originally invested. And this is a big problem. So if you're interested in understanding exactly which projects to invest in and what factors influence them, head over to Telegram. I'll pin the link. There you'll find the 9 most popular investment projects. I go over the pros and cons of these projects there. You can read and get familiar with them. I think you'll find it interesting. Join in. An important issue is, of course, the factor of low or high price. That is, different people perceive price differently. Let me explain what I mean. For example, if you take a price of $2,000 per square meter for someone who wanted to buy an economy option for $1,000 per square meter, yes, that price will seem very high to them. But if, for example, you take someone who wanted to buy a premium class property in Moscow or St. Petersburg, knowing how much it costs there, well, there it's $6,000 per square meter, $10,000 per square meter, or even in Sochi, it could be $15,000 or $20,000 per square meter. Then coming here and seeing a premium class building under construction for $2,500 per square meter, for them, that seems very low, right? Because, well, it's great housing, a great location, and so on. So when we talk about whether the price is low or high, it's important, of course, to consider what segment this housing belongs to, what its final cost is, and not just its final cost here, but also in different countries around the world. Because, of course, this housing is competing with properties in different countries around the world. Georgia is an open country. Here people can come, sell, and buy, and people from absolutely different countries do this, European, Arab, and so on, right? That's why the price here is roughly at the global average. and it should be compared with similar projects in other countries. More or less in terms of quality, well, if of course these countries are comparable in price, for example with Georgia. Very often here, and not only here, people fall into the trap of low prices. That is, the desire to buy at the lowest possible price, to save money and so on, leads to a strong focus on price. And often a person forgets that when choosing a project to invest money in for investments, price has a certain factor, yes, its own place in the list. But it is not the only main factor which people forget when they prioritize price. And in such cases, they often invest in projects that have a low price, but the quality and value of the product itself are so low that when the product is completed, or when they later want to resell it, they can't do it for any reasonable amount of money. Why? Because the developer didn't have enough money to build a good product. The developer didn't receive enough funding. Or maybe from the very beginning he never intended to build a good project. He just drew pretty pictures, as often happens. And naturally, when you chase after low prices, you should always ask yourself, what quality of product am I getting for this low price? And is it really a low price? Because often the price isn't actually low at all, but even high, even though it may seem low. That's a rather quick, brief overview. You can find more information on my Telegram channel. Go there and check it out. I've put together a whole knowledge base for you there. Leave me a comment under this video about what you liked, what you didn't like, and any questions you have. Maybe there are some questions you have that I didn't cover. I'll definitely answer you in the comments. See you next time.